Can I ask a question? Or are we all muted up?
Okay, your host.
Okay,
And we're
I
live.
think we're live. So assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to Sheikhs Breaks. Tonight we are talking all things meat. And our special guests are Dr. Nigat Hasnain. So Uncle Nigat, are you all right?
Walaikum assalam, I'm very well, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. And the one and only Dr. Lutfi Redwan from the iconic Willowbrook Farm. So assalamu alaikum Lutfi.
Walaikum assalam.
So Lutfi, if you could take a seat on our virtual sofa and we'll get to you as soon as we can. We'll be speaking to Nigat first, inshallah. So Nigat, I'm going to formally introduce you and then we'll sort of get straight in. So Nigat has a background in mechanical engineering and a master's in environmental policy from Imperial College, London. She initially worked in the process engineering industry where she helped with meeting EU compliance requirements. After taking some time out, she read for a PhD at Imperial College. Her research was on the UK livestock sector, the impact the sector had on the environment, and how diet shifts to less meat could make a difference. Her focus here was largely on the conventional system reliant on concentrates and grain to feed animals. She's a co-founder of a startup company which develops digital solutions for farmers that enable them to manage their key resources, land, water, people, animals, and money, so that they remain profitable while improving the environment. She's also working part-time with the WWF UK, where she's part of a team that works closely with the government, retailers, NGOs, and investors to develop pathways to achieve net zero carbon emissions from the farming sector by 2050 using regenerative agriculture and nature-friendly farming approaches. So, assalamu alaikum, Nigat.
Walaikum assalam.
So I'd just like to point out, Nigat, and to all the participants, that the WWF is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, not the World Wrestling Foundation, and just in case there was any confusion.
Yeah, just by looking at me, you can make out.
You never know, you never know. So Nigat, we wanted to get straight into it, but just before that, I've done it again. I've forgotten to introduce my beloved co-host, Khalik Siddiqui, who will be on the buttons and taking questions later. Assalamu alaikum, Khalik.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Lovely to be back. It's been a little bit of a break, but really happy that we're all here. Lovely to meet everybody.
It's a Sheikhs Breaks, no less.
No less.
Okay, so Nigat, I know this is a huge question to start off with, but how do farming practices, I know that's your area of expertise, how do farming practices affect the man on the street? I.e., why should the average Joe be worried about how the field is ploughed, how it's watered or fed, as long as he gets his chicken? Yeah, so let's start off with that.
Okay, well, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to join the lovely work that you're doing. And I think it's really great that you're trying to engage the community in some very topical issues. So, talking about meat, it's been in the media for all sorts of reasons, and I think your question really focuses on farming practices and how it impacts you, me, and everybody else. So I think in order to understand that, I think what I will do is I'll try and keep it to what is happening in the UK. So we have a fairly conventional, intensive form of agriculture, which is also, it's sort of something that has got more and more, has developed after the Second World War, and where we had food insecurities, and we went into a system which was much more, producing fewer things, but in a more intensive way. We also have a much more globalized farming system now, and the supply chains are much wider. So what has happened as a consequence, is that the food prices have gone down quite considerably from what they were after the war. And also they're much more accessible. So on the whole, you can say that, a lot of Britain can have relatively cheap food, which is good in some respects. But I think if you look at it in more detail, I mean, we spend now about only 10 to 11% on our, on food compared to all the other things that we spend on. But if you look at, say, a very poor person in Pakistan, for instance, the amount they spend on food is about 60% of their, total spending. So I think it's also brought in a lot of inequitable, situations. So that's one thing that I feel the current farming practices have impacted. So some people have really benefited in the sense that they have access to food, but then there have been inequities as well. Another thing that has impacted, us is the disconnect. And I think we've become more and more disconnected from where, the food is produced. We have much longer supply chains. We have a lot more intermediaries. We do not link to the landscape in which the food is produced or the people who produce that food. So I think that disconnect is, it's that disconnect together with this intensification has led to it's something that I feel is quite, people don't value food in the way it was celebrated or valued, historically. And we've become much more, sort of selective in what we eat as well. Our diversity in what we eat is much less. We have a lot more food wastage as well. About 30% of all the food that we eat is actually wasted. And this was a study done by RAP, some years back. And they actually went through the bins of people and restaurants, etc. And this is only the waste that is actually going in the bins. There's a lot that goes down the drain, like milk, etc. So that's not even picked up. So again, it's probably higher than 30%, but that's all linked to the lack of value. We just look at, we don't even think that we just look at the expiry date and we say, oh, it's passed and it should go in the bin. We don't use our senses or anything anymore to make decisions about food. And then there's this thing about, the health. Is there a hidden cost of the food that we're producing so intensively? Because we use a lot more glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is a type of herbicide, but I think from a medical perspective, you can think of it as a very broad-based antibiotic. That's how it works. So it removes a lot of things. So how much of that is coming into our systems? How much of that is impacting our guts, or our internal, or the gut system? And there are a lot of other things that are used in the industry, like hormones and antibiotics in animals. And then there are all these zoonotic diseases. So the question is that we are producing a lot of food, but is it of really good value? And are we eating really nutrient-dense food? We have, so that's, those are the three key things I think that, impact us.
Yeah, no, so thank you for highlighting those points, Nighat. But I mean, the next question is, what can we do about it? I mean, you mentioned food wastage, hormones, antibiotics, and the disconnect. I mean, there's some major sort of issues there. Is there anything we can do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a, I mean, I'm not sure whether I should go into what the community can do to make better. Maybe we can do that towards the end. But I think what I would like to talk about maybe more is how, how the disconnect in particular, because I think unless we really connect back with nature and where the food is produced, I don't think we will really understand what we're eating and why we should value it. I think at the moment when we look at any food produced, and it's not just meat, it's other things as well. It's the fruits and vegetables we eat as well. We only look at it through a very narrow lens of consumption. And if we look at livestock agriculture or meat, we should really think about livestock agriculture as a whole, and that is operating within a big landscape. And these landscapes are what would globally be called grasslands or savannas. Okay, they form about 20 to 40% of the terrestrial area, and about 80% of cropland is actually used to be grassland. So a lot of the best lands were taken for growing crops, but they were originally grasslands. So I think these grasslands are really important because they provide huge ecosystem services. And I think we need to understand what sort of ecosystems they provide us biodiversity. I mean, in Britain, through this intensive agriculture, we have lost about 60% of all our biodiversity, which is quite a lot. And this whole landscape of grasslands is also very important for recharging our water aquifers. So we may live in the city, but actually, so for instance, we use water from the Thames, but the Thames is actually really dependent on water that it's getting from its catchment, and that can go all the way up to Gloucestershire. So we really, we need to think about the cities as connected to the hinterland or the landscape behind it. And you know, for all the water that we get, for instance, the quality of the water, but also the quantity. And I think one of the issues that you had, and we had in Cumbria, for instance, we had those floods, and they cost a significant amount, you know, of money, and a lot of cost for individual people. And I think one of the things that came out of that is that we can't keep on building flood defenses, but we need to look at our landscapes, our grasslands, our agricultural land, and try and see if we can hold the water back there and recharge the water. And there have been some very interesting projects on that front. So, you know, these ecosystems are not just simply for producing food, they do a lot of other things as well. In terms of something that is very topical, I think around meat in particular is the carbon footprint. And they talk about, you know, it has so many emissions and it's worse than a car, which is quite ridiculous. I mean, that's my opinion. But the reason why I say that is the way the metrics are calculated. So for instance, in the case of food produced, you look at the whole life cycle, anything and everything that's gone into it, you look at how it is. So for instance, in this case, if you fed it grain, if you fed the animal grain, you would look at the fertilizer that was used to grow that grain, you look at the production of that fertilizer, and you put that all into the, you know, the calculation. Whereas if you look at something like using a car, you wouldn't look at how the car is produced, you only look at the end point of use, which would be how much fuel you'd use. So I think when we look at actual footprints, if you look at it, agriculture and, you know, fossil fuel is about 75%, but you have, you know, I think it's important to remember the relative context. So, you know, that you have emissions, but you also have landscapes, which, you know, we need to look at the whole system, not just simply emissions. So if you look at the grassland system, it is responsible for a lot of carbon capture. Almost 20 to 34% of carbon, you know, emissions are actually trapped in, you know, can be held into this landscape. And this is far more than what can be held in the tropical rainforest. So, you know, it's a very, very important landscape that needs to be protected. And when we talk about livelihoods that depend on that landscape, and that's livestock farming, you need to really look at it in a very broader perspective. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing I wanted to say. I had a little graph which I wanted to show you. It was really the grasslands of the world, and I do think it's really important to showcase. Can I share my screen?
You can try, Nigar. I'm not the technical expert here, but you can have a go. But whilst
yeah, sure, you should be able to share.
Okay. So we've got lots of nonsense over here. Oh, here we are. Yeah. So if I just show you this one, so this is can you see my?
Yep.
Picture? Yeah. So these are you know, if you look at all the, you know, the grasslands expand where you know, you have traditionally you have nomadic tribes. We used to have nomadic tribes. You have you know, it expands from the tundra right in the north, from both the poles, you know, so from this, you know, the tundra regions, and in you know, near the South Pole, and all the way to the tropics. So grasslands are a huge area, and the bits that you see are in brown. They are grasslands. Many of them are grasslands which are degrading. So you know, there's a huge potential for grasslands to perform a really big role in carbon sequestration, which is something, you know, I feel very passionately about. And I feel that the role of livestock has been almost ignored in that. And it's something that we feel needs to be brought out. So when we consume meat, we need to think about, are we improving these grasslands, or are we causing more pressure on them? So those are the sort of things I think is important when we talk about it, because it's not just what's happening to the grasslands, it's also our livelihoods that are at stake. And then if you look at I should have put it in this, but you know, I think one of the things that we need to think about is, you know, how do grasslands protect the soil? And I think soil is really important, you know, for us. So I think one of the things that you know, that we need to do is actually, and you know, I've done some studies here in the UK looking at how much carbon there is in grasslands, how much carbon there is in the soil of cropland. And one thing that comes across quite clearly is that grasslands have a lot more soil organic carbon. And you know, so that is why, you know, traditionally in this country, what farmers do is they would bring in livestock. So they would grow crops for 3 years, and then they'd bring in the livestock to improve the soil. They would grow grasses for a few years, 3-4 years, and then they would grow crops. So that would be a rotation. And I think one thing to remember is that everything grows in the top few centimeters, and that's known as the topsoil. But we're losing about 24 billion tons of it globally, which is about 3.4 tons per year per person. And the UK loses 3 million tons of topsoil a year. A lot of it is from cropping systems, poor agriculture. And if we then put it in context that it takes about 1,000 years to produce 3 or 4 centimeters of soil, this topsoil, then it's quite significant what we're losing. And I have a little case study of Iowa. This is in the USA, which has lost about 15 to 30 centimeters of its topsoil in the last 160 years. And that's equivalent to 5,000 to 10,000 years of topsoil formation. So I think when we look at any food we produce, and I'm digressing a bit from meat, but I think we should look at the whole thing together. We need to look at how we're protecting these very vital resources. Are we exploiting them to the point that we will have no food in the future, and more conflict and more issues around that?
So Nika, can I ask you, you talked sort of heavily about grasslands there.
Yeah.
So if that is the kind of utopian future for farming, why aren't we doing it here?
So in the UK, I mean, incidentally, we have 70% of all agricultural land is actually grassland in this country. And traditionally, before the Second World War, a lot of farms were mixed farms. So they would produce crops and they would have livestock. And in fact, they were really reluctant after the Second World War to actually move into arable farming. But basically because of the food shortages following the Second World War, the UK government and the EU as well, within the EU as well, they made one decision that Europe would never be food insecure again. So they gave subsidies to farmers to produce more and more. And that sort of changed a lot of the thing of how they moved from, so the livestock were moved up, they became more specialist grain producers. So in the east of England, if you look at the United Kingdom, east of it, you have a lot of cropping, and there has been a lot more drainage of the soil, etc., so that it is more easy to grow crops there. But in the west of England, you'd find more livestock because there are a lot more grasslands. So, I mean, I think the issue is that we are not questioning whether you should or shouldn't. We can have less meat, but I think we need to think about the type of meat we are having. Are we going to, have meat which is, based on concentrates and crops where, or should we have meat that is grass-fed completely on grasses? Because that's what these herbivores were designed to have anyway in the first place. And so this is, I think the question is more about the type of meat rather than meat itself, I would say. And if you're looking at grassland systems, I think they would be more extensive. And so, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So could I get to unshare the screen now?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that.
No, fantastic. So, I mean, we've got lots of questions coming through on the chat, which is great. So obviously there's a lot of interest there. But one thing before we take some questions, perhaps.
Have I unshared it? Yeah,
that's right. That's fine. Great. One thing before we take some questions, you touched upon offline subsidies, and I thought that was quite an important thing to mention. If you could sort of just highlight that in a nutshell. I know it's probably a bit of a can of worms, but if you could sort of just explain to everyone the issue with subsidies and why that's important, perhaps why it affects farming in the UK.
Yeah, I think the subsidies, I think you have to go back, and it's really interesting because I never realized it until I actually tried to help my son with some of his history, and I realized how dependent Europe was on food from the USA during the wars, and the First World War and the Second World War. And in fact, the United States built a lot of its economy on producing this food and selling it off to Europe. And there was a lot of warfare going on, sinking these ships that were being, sent over here. But post-war, we had a food shortage issue, and so the subsidies were brought in as a consequence of that. And I think, and what is also, what it has actually done is actually it has, it's like a pivot. It's sort of moved the farmers, and they were reluctant in the beginning, but when they were given lots of money and incentives and to move into into a different system, and then there was the introduction of fertilizer. The fertilizer was actually I should say, a sort of a second, so it comes from the Haber-Bosch process, which was used to produce basically ammunitions on ammonium nitrate can be an explosive as well. And then again, you had the chemical industry, which was producing a lot of, chemical sort of weaponry. And so you had this new thing that you could produce nitrogen fertilizers, and you had these pesticides to deal with these very special, so you could produce things a lot more, but then you can, these crops that you can produce very en masse and in large quantities are also not very robust. They're not very resilient to diseases and pests. So they need, pesticides and herbicides and so on and so forth. So I think that's what one of the things that the subsidies have done is it's created it's introduced these fertilizers and pesticides into our environment, which I think was not necessary. Before, farmers had to rely on the land. So the soil and everything around them was an investment, and they would look after it. But now you had this external fertilizer that you could just put in and make the plant grow faster. And so that's one thing. The other thing that's happened is, we've lost a lot of our hedgerows, our wildlife, etc. As a consequence of that. Almost 50% of our hedgerows have gone. The soil has got poorer with time, and we have a lot of our water quality. For instance, I mean, UK's only 16% and 1/6% of our water bodies actually have good ecological status according to the Water Framework Directive, the EU directive. And that's quite a small percentage, and it's really a problem. One of the biggest problems we find is pollution from diffuse pollution, like sediment running off the land. So it's basically topsoil running off the land and going into the waters. So this is very valuable soil. The farmer doesn't really, really view it as an asset, but it's going down into the rivers, causing pollution somewhere else. That's one thing that's happened as a result of the subsidies. The second thing is the market distortion. So for instance, when the subsidies initially were given to produce more and more because there was a food shortage. So they soon, farmers, of course, are smart people. So they actually produce more and more. And they had so much that we had butter mountains and milk lakes, etc. And then these would be dumped on the world market, and that would lower the price. And, so this was very contentious. And as a consequence of that, other countries, which are non-EU countries, were debating, this was not right. And so it was changed. And we changed the original subsidy system, which was based on produce more and more, to something that still had that element, but also brought in some environmental requirements as well. But the way it was structured was, they had two pillars. So the first pillar was basically very similar to the old, direct payments. And you were paid basically, the more land you had, the more money you got. And they put in some constraints and restrictions, but because there weren't enough resources, nobody goes to check them. So effectively, you get paid for the amount of land you have, okay? And then, but that didn't stop bad practices and, the things happening. And then the remaining 20% is actually to correct what you've damaged in the first place. So it's quite a ridiculous system where you have one pillar which gives money to farmers to do business as usual, and then the second pillar, which is agriculture, the environmental subsidies, to go and fix what you've damaged already. And you had a system in which the bigger the farm, the more they benefited. So the smallholder farmer really struggled, and that happened here. We have an opportunity now to change post-Brexit. We will be leaving this cap system, and by 2027 we should be having the environmental land management scheme, and that's what we're working on right now, is trying to see how can it be equitable, how can it bring in all farmers, big and small, and how can we pick up all practices, but also try to get farmers to to transition from this conventional industrial form of agriculture to a more sustainable one. So that's where we are.
No, I mean, that's a brilliant summary, Nighat. Thanks very much. So we've got lots of questions coming through on the chat, Nighat. So I'm just going to pass you over to Khalik, Brother Khalik, to field those questions. There may be some overlap with Dr. Lutfi, but if you want to sort of pass them on to Lutfi for later on, feel free. But whatever's within your area of expertise, feel free to answer. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much, Omar, and thanks so much, Nick. That's astonishing. And I don't know if you're alluding to the fact that there might be something positive about the Brexit. When your last statement that you said that, you know, there may be some positives coming out for the farmers and actually for the sustenance of what's going on over there. There's a couple of questions. Wasik has the first one. He did raise his hand, so I'm hoping that he's going to unmute and speak up to say that he was going to speak to you live. I'm going to hand you over to Wasik. Wasik, can you unmute your line?
Yeah. Hi, Assalamu. Thanks for the session tonight. Quick question then to start with. How do we make the ethical, sustainable choice more affordable?
Okay, I mean, I totally, totally agree with you on that. It really has to be for all. And I think at the moment, I think Lucy will be able to answer that better because he produces and he's more on the production side. But I do feel that the structures in place and the subsidies, that the way they are structured, make it, make more sustainable farming, much more expensive. And so the producer has to, the cost of production is much higher. So the cost of, to the ordinary consumer is also going to be high. I think I'm hoping that if we move into a system where all farmers move into more sustainable approaches, then I think there will be more supply and the prices should come down. But one thing that I have done, which I found, I used to originally source and I get boxes of, meat and whatnot, and I just thought, I live quite close to the high street, and I just thought, well, what can I do that is different, because I get this from there, and then yet you have all this happening around me, they're selling the same sort of meat. So I started talking to my local butchers and asking them questions. And every time I went in, I asked the same questions again and again about, okay, where are you sourcing your meat? Oh, grass-fed meat looks like this, and this is how it goes. So, getting myself more informed about the subject of what is good meat. Now, it doesn't have to be organic, but, and for me, if they can transition to something. So what I'm really excited about is that he's now started, getting much more interested in the type of meat, where he's sourcing. I can trace back to the farmer, so I can get the details from him on that. He's trying to change his ways. He can he's bringing in meat that is much more grass fed and free range, and so I think so it's not as expensive as say organic, but it's somewhere in between the price. And for me, that's working. We need it to become affordable, but I think it will be a question of time. We need policymakers to make the framework that makes it easy. But I think the trick is actually for the farmers and for the consumers to ask for it. We've got to make an effort to ask the questions and force the people who we buy from to think differently and act locally as well in that.
Thank you so much. I think that's quite a difficult situation for many members of families or large households, I guess, to go down that route. But that's a great and comprehensive answer there. The next question has come from Gulnora and asking, where is the best place to source meat and vegetables free of pesticides, hormones, and antibiotics? Is it even possible in the UK?
Oh, I think you go to Listry. I think I'm sure it is possible. I think, and I think one of the things I have a problem with is the traceability, and how you have all these labels, and it's so confusing. What does it mean? What does this mean? And what does that mean? And I can imagine anybody who's looking at them gets totally confused. And so I think we need some sort of labeling which is much more consistent and transparent, and it sort of also connects you to the farmer as well. So one thing that some of the farmers do is they have this QR code, and you click, you can use an app to do that, and you can actually then see, go and see the farm itself, and you can connect with the producer. But I think it's quite hard to find that. There are places, you just have to ask. And I think you've got to trust your judgment as well a bit in that. So for instance, in terms of organic vegetables, etc., there are people, just Google it and you will find people, but they are a bit pricey. And so I think one of the other things which I find is that you need to think about more seasonal things as well. You can buy organic, but if it's out of season, it's going to cost a lot more. So sometimes, it helps to get something in season. And you can get them at the supermarkets as well. And some of the, I've become a bit choosy about this now. So I don't have all the things that normally what I would advise people is don't eat out of season, just eat what's there. So even if it's better produced, you would, if it's seasonal, it will be less costly as well.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because, just going back to what you were saying about the QR codes, is that kind of some sort of a legislative thing where people have to be able to go back to the source, or is it just, luck of the draw, some would provide that and others wouldn't?
Yeah, it's a group of farmers who just have pasture-fed livestock, and they do that just to facilitate their members. I think that's why they do it. And I thought it was really interesting to have that, and I think it may become more and more popular with time. But technology will have a role to play in helping, consumers decide. I think consumers can have a huge role to play. We can, if we create enough demand, a lot more farmers will get into the business, especially into halal, because I find that a real problem to, for it to be halal as well as all this. And so we need to try and make inroads there, because more sustainable farming should be less expensive, but we need the policy structure.
No, I agree in that perspective. No, thank you so much for that. And I think there's another question here from Asma Tariq, and she's asking, actually, is halal ethical farming commercially viable in the UK even?
I'll pass it on to Lutfi.
Yeah, these are quite Lutfi sort of level questions, but I guess maybe they're asking your opinion before they are ready to ask.
I've had this problem as well, because sometimes, if food is produced in a way, animals are kept in a very inhumane condition, okay? And they are then, the only thing that I spoke to somebody, a friend of mine used to work for these, for one of the certification bodies. And I think the key concern was only in the way of slaughter and not the rest of the life of the animal. So, we have to ask ourselves this question, that just because, what do we mean by halal? It's a question I think we should all be asking.
Yeah, I completely understandable, and I agree. There's one more question from brother Matthew. Matthew, would you like to unmute your line and ask your question? Hopefully it's not a more of a brother Lutfi type question.
Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thank you for your presentation so far. It's been really interesting. I had a couple of questions, actually. One was in relation to the increasing trend for veganism, and whether you thought that that was going to have an impact on trends in the farming and industry. And the other one was about meat substitutes, which seem to be taking off. Companies like Palantir in the US and others are coming to the fore. I'm just wondering whether you think that had a realistic impact on farming and meat consumption.
Yeah. I think it it is a concern for some of the farmers that I work with, and they get really upset when they hear things. And a lot of them are livestock farmers, so they get really upset. But what they have started doing is having a direct channel and actually opening up their farms to the to people, to consumers, and having more direct connections. And they find that actually, some of those farmers who've been successful at that feel that it's not really a problem. Nevertheless, on a broader scale, I think it could be an issue. But veganism itself, I think, the reason why veganism is there is because of the industrial way of producing animals. I think it's a response to this very intensive form of agriculture that we have. So in some respects, I can empathize with why they're doing it. However, veganism is not going to solve the problem because, you have people, for instance, in many parts of the world where they can't grow so many crops and they don't have the supply chains as well. So they do depend on livestock. So I think it will grow to an extent, but not that much. But then that's my opinion. Also, veganism, do we have more soya? Or where will we source all the soya from? Do we cut down the forest? So, the Brazilian forest or whatever. So it's something we need to think about in terms of, I think it's, we should have maybe less meat, but I think we should, have a more balanced diet. And if we recognize that, a lot of the land is grassland, and the grasslands perform such an important role in regulating water, regulating biodiversity, and so on, and so many other ecosystem functions. So we need to support the livelihoods over there. So I think the case has to be made for livestock farms. In fact, I just wanted to add that, very recently at WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, they've recognized that grasslands are one of the most underrated, compared to all other ecosystems. So forests and marine systems and wetlands, etc., have a lot higher profile than grasslands, and yet they are one of the most threatened areas. And so they recently started an initiative to get it engaged, to get more traction on all the UN forums. So at the moment, it's not even recognized, and this is a big issue. So what we are trying to, and I'm working with them as well, we're trying to get a higher profile for grasslands and actually the role it plays in regulating the wider ecosystem. And when we start looking at that, and when that message gets through, then I think it is going to make an impact of its own. And in fact, even now, people who are in the policy area, people who work with farmers, and people who are advising, for instance, DEFRA and working at the UN level, are very mindful of the fact that these livestock systems are extremely important, and that veganism is one form, but it may, eventually it will all have some equilibrium. There was another thing that you asked. I think veganism was one, and the other was.
No, Jazakallah khair. Yeah, the second question was around meat substitute. Companies are obviously innovating, and there are companies in the US that have made contracts with companies like Pepsi. Where do you think that trend's going, and is it like to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's another area. I mean, I don't think, all these things are, I mean, I just think who has the proprietary rights over it, and I think who will have access to that sort of thing. I think we will probably have some of that as well. But I do think, globally speaking, there are people who will, still rely on livestock systems, and I do think that will probably be the major market. But we've got to talk about it in a natural way. I mean, it's much more natural, to have your food produced through nature-based solutions rather than in the lab. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in terms of, it's just a matter of, I do feel that in the longer term, I think we will probably, if we can get the conversation going in the right way, and we have enough farmers moving and transitioning, then I think we should have alternatives. But there is a commercial drive in this, these lab-produced foods. And
no, thank you. Thank you for that. That's very comprehensively answered. Awais is your next question. He's eager to come online and ask as well. Just Awais, if you can unmute your line.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Hey, Assalamu alaikum, Nigat.
Walaikum assalam.
Right. Actually, we talked about this last time we had the chat as well. Yeah. It's around microfarming, because I think this is something that everyone's going to hear more about in the kind of non-farming community. Can you tell a little bit about microfarming to the audience, and actually that conversation we had, if it is a sustainable way of managing farm supply chains and consumer global demands? It'd be good to touch on that as well, because actually your perspective that you gave was really, really interesting, and it's something that I thought. So I think it'd be good to share that with the audience as well.
So micro farming. So small scale farming, is that what you're talking about, right?
Well, in terms of where you have like private organizations, they set up these big type of areas where they grow, for example, tomatoes in this, and as in other crops, vegetables, right? In these kind of, what's the way of putting it? Is these private greenhouses in a way, right?
Internally, is that right? What you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of work going on in that in Bristol, for instance, Bristol University. I think it has some it's really heavily into all that, producing and they're very efficient in the sense they use very little water. They use very specialist sort of light because it works on a certain range because plants respond to sunlight. And they use certain wavelengths of the sunlight, so they're very, very specialized in that respect. But I think maybe in some urban areas or some, those sort of areas, it could take some pressure off, say, the rural landscape. And that could be something we can think about because if you look at the UK, for instance, we import 60% of our food produced from elsewhere. So, the UK may become net zero, but maybe it will offset all its footprint on other countries, and that's one thing we have to you think about. So if we have these sort of urban landscapes and we have this form of what should I say, growing maybe some of our salads or some other crops, etc., that can grow in those environments, and one can think of it that there's an option for that. I think in the end we need not just one solution, we need a whole spectrum. So for instance, we work with some farmers who are purely organic. I mean, some stakeholder groups who are organic, and they want that to be recognized within the new scheme. But there are a lot of farmers who may find it very difficult to reach them. So our interest is actually to make sure that everybody is included in that. We want people to transition and everybody to transition to a better system. So how do you get that? You need to be more inclusive. So yes, I think this may be a form of farming that may be suited for certain environments and certain customers, but I do not know if it can become mainstream. It's quite costly, it's quite expensive to run them.
Thanks so much for that. Really appreciate that. I'm going to hand you back over to Amir now, and we're going to continue on with the program hopefully, but really appreciate you answering all cracking questions from the community as well. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Nigat. Thank you for all the questions, as Khalik said. So Nigat, if I could ask you to have a seat again on our virtual sofa, and I'm going to invite Dr. Lutfi to the conversation. Lutfi, if you're there, if you could open your video. Assalamu alaikum, how are you? All right? Thank you for being so patient, but some interesting stuff there. So Lutfi, just before we dive in, I'm just going to introduce you formally. Dr. Lutfi Redwan was born and raised in North London at the age of 18, traveled to Saudi Arabia where he first studied Arabic in Medina, mashallah, before entering the Faculty of Sharia. Partway through his degree, transferred back to the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, in London, where he studied for a joint honours degree in Arabic and Geography. He continued his studies at Oxford University, obtaining a PhD in soil and water conservation. He subsequently lectured in London and Oxford universities and worked for many years as an agricultural consultant in Africa and Asia. In 2002, he gave up his post at Oxford to embark on a new career as a farmer. With his family, they moved onto a 45-acre farm north of Oxford, where they have sought to farm according to Islamic principles, to rear animals ethically and sustainably, to produce their own energy needs sustainably, and build using natural materials, and to take responsibility for the recycling and reuse of their waste. The farm has also become a centre for educational visits and holds an annual arts and musical festival to celebrate connection to the environment. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Lutfi.
Wa alaikum assalam. That sounds very good.
I hope so. Lutfi, just before we dive in, have you met Michael Eavis perchance?
No, at Glastonbury. No, I know.
That's right, yeah.
Well, actually, sorry. Honestly, I'll have to share this with you. This is the world's first. That's what we like. When I was a 16-year-old kid, I played the drums in a band, and it was in the year that Glastonbury was cancelled, and me and my mates jumped in a van and we went to the unofficial Glastonbury, and I actually played at the unofficial Glastonbury in a very terrible youth band back in 73 or 4, God knows, no, 77 must have been. Yeah, my God. Okay, so you heard that first, yeah.
That is amazing. Well, I'll share with you that I was also in a band many years ago, but as a scratch DJ, no less. So hence the Sheikhs breaks thing going on. But anyway, moving swiftly on.
Move swiftly on from that, yeah, please.
So Lutfi, we'll dive straight in. I'm sure there's some burning questions from the audience, but I want to clear up one thing which is probably on the tips of most people's tongue. In terms of and can you just clear up what that means, what that looks like, and perhaps what the state of that is currently in UK?
The state of what? Sorry, I missed your actual word.
The current state of the halal industry in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we've been around for 19 years. When we started, we actually had sort of given up on the halal meat industry. A lot of us might know from going to pick up your Eid slaughter, some of the big abattoirs that we currently use. No one was really questioning the provenance of meat. As we've already heard from Nigat, farming in the UK has changed over probably say the last 100 years from being something quite traditional and sustainable to a very industrialized form of farming, where in fact the government forced farmers to move towards a more commercialized and more pesticide and chemical based way of producing. Halal, understandably, for the first few generations of the Muslim communities in the UK, meant very, very little more than simply at least maintaining the ritual of mentioning the name of God over the meat at the point of slaughter. Understandably, the concerns were with establishing mosques, madrasas, and getting halal meat available. So no one really questioned. I was surprised when we first came to the decision to move towards this more natural way of life. That was many years before, but we were always discussing with people, well, the Quran always talks about halal and tayyib together, and that was new to most people. They'd say, really? And they'd look in the Quran, and now it's sort of commonplace. We've all accepted that, yes, the word halal isn't really used without the word tayyib, and one needs to understand that. With the debates moved on, and it means a lot more now to most people. I think you could win any Muslim over an argument quite quickly to an understanding that really halal has to mean something more than just the Bismillah Allahu Akbar at the point of slaughter. Within the industry, it hasn't. We're scratching the surface. I think there are 2 or 3 people starting to do small projects around the UK. We can barely supply a tiny proportion of what's consumed. So it's big business. What does halal mean? I think it means very little. It's a very big business. It's providing a lot of income. It's providing a lot of cheap meat. It's so cheap, even Nando's can afford it for their mass sales. It's the cheapest of the cheap. If you replace what it means to most people, take away the word halal, they mean cheap stuff, cheap rubbish. Honestly, that's what people recognize it as. We've got a bad name in the media. Some of that is racism and misinformation, but some of it is because it is mass produced, particularly in the poultry industry. Sorry to be so stark about that. I would never say that you can't eat what's available. You say Bismillah and eat it. No sheikh is going to say, and certainly no non-sheikh like myself is going to try and give a judgment on what people should eat. But I think the halal meat industry is a byword for a very dirty, murky business where people make a lot of money procuring meat from wherever they can at the cheapest price. It's a drive down towards the lowest price.
No, thank you for that. And thank you for being so honest. And certainly this is not the forum to hold back. So just tell it how it is, Lutfi. We appreciate that. So so thank you for clarifying tayyib and halal. So again, probably another very obvious question, perhaps from the community, would be the position on stunning, pre-stunning, HFA and HMC. Sorry to sort of be so obvious, but if you could sort of meander your way through that mess.
Yeah, I will. I mean, I'd add one more thing to the concept of halal and tayyib. I think it's important to realize we're not just talking about meat. We are obviously, what we're trying to raise is the issue of the life of the animals, but the life of the environment they're reared in, But also, you know, in traditional Arabic, you talk about someone being ibn halal or ibn haram, you know, someone actually being a good or a bad person. So it's about your whole lifestyle. It's about the way that you live. It's about the communities. Some of what Nigat was saying was alluding towards that. You know, when you've got sustainable methods of production, you're actually feeding into a community, structures, relationships to the land, relationships to each other. And when you go the other way, factory farmed food and relationships to KFC and relationships to, you know, other corporations and what have you, you're creating. So there's a hadith I always quote, a very simple one of the Prophet Muhammad, which is ad-din mu'amala. Your religion is your social interaction. You sort of choose which way you gravitate with your economic transactions, with your social interactions, and you support what you support. So at one point or another, we've got to say halal and tayyib is much larger than that. It's about social structures. Your second question about stunning and non-stunning. Again, some of you might have seen some of the videos, I think from America, where they show an actual slaughter where they calm the sheep down and actually slaughter it. And I know that on the farm that we can handle an individual animal, sheep or poultry. We can slaughter them without a need for stun because they're in a calm state. We literally, just outside the door here, we rear our chicks, at day-old chicks. They move after 2 or 3 weeks out onto the range just over there. They're reared out on the range for 10 or 11 weeks and move back about 30 meters to the small on-farm abattoir where once a week we do the slaughter. So those animals are living in a comfortable area. They're transported without any sort of agitation and heightened awareness, and the slaughter can be done calmly. The HMC HFA debate, I don't really want to plow into it, and I'm sure I'll anger someone if I do. I think most of the scholars, from what I've understood, would not say that stunning per se is haram. I think the view is that stunning, as long as it's not the method of killing the animal, is not necessarily wrong. My view on it is that in a mass abattoir, where you're slaughtering thousands, even millions of birds, for example, particularly, in a very fast throughput, they are in an extremely agitated and heightened state of panic and suffering. They're pumping adrenaline. There are so many issues. They've often got broken limbs from the way they're shackled and they're transported and the way that they're taken to the slaughter. Were you not to use a stun in that situation, it could be argued is just as bad for them, because you are allowing them to be killed with all that pain and suffering clearly in their head. Some would argue by using the stun, you pacify them. I think the simple argument is stop factory farming and factory slaughter, mass slaughter, where all the pain and suffering occurs, and you sort of deal with that issue.
No, thank you, Lutfi, for sort of highlighting that as well. But I mean, what you painted is quite a poor picture of what most of us are doing, and the horizon in the future looks very sunny, but also very expensive. So the next question I wanted to segue into was sort of the economic side, and why is organic farming or organic produce so expensive? Again, it might seem obvious, but if you could sort of highlight the main factors there and how we could perhaps progress towards that goal.
It's a difficult one, and yeah, I hate to sound like doom and gloom, or worse still, that I'm in some way sort of preaching with some moral authority. No, I mean, we're all living in a time, there's that hadith we all know about interest, where there'll come a time where we're all tainted by interest. In a similar way, we're all tainted by the byproducts of this industrial civilization, and it's very difficult for us, whether it's the fibers we're wearing, whether it's the materials in our buildings, whether it's the modes of transport we use, we're all in some way or another implicated, and therefore I'm not making that point to guilt people, but the first step in changing something is to change it in your heart. And I think awareness, knowledge can give us awareness, and then we make the small changes we can make. What was your question again? Okay, the cost. The cost of meat. Well, There used to be a BBC Radio 4 program called Costing the Earth, and I like the title. You know, what the point that they were making is that how do you cost things? You know, we're used to very cheap meat, but Nigat's already pointed out they receive subsidies. There's the issue of externalities, which is the pollution, which is the byproduct of all those production systems leaching into our waterways, the overuse of fossil fuel energy, whether it's in the machinery, the processing, alongside the welfare issues, the suffering. So it's not cheap to produce in this negative way, the factory farming method, but it's made artificially cheap for us. So we're all recipients of a massive global subsidy on a system that is polluting our earth, on a system that is causing untold welfare suffering. And therefore it's delivering us cheap food, but at a cost. I like the point that you made, Nigat, earlier when you mentioned, because I've seen similar data on the UK. 100 years ago, people in the UK were spending also 50 to 60% of their income on food. So that transition that we've made away from that, it's amazing. Now it's, I think you said 10% that we spend on food. What do we spend the rest on? And are those things good for us? So are we nurturing communities that are actually taking responsibility? You know, we're getting the latest gadgets. We know the sort of industrial problems in the production of that. We're getting more clothes. Are they coming from slave labor in Bangladesh and what have you? We've got all these consumer resources. We're all visiting IKEA or wherever. We need to do an audit, you know, with Ramadan coming up. We should be doing an audit of not just thinking about our food, but thinking about all of the materials which we surround ourselves with, even for our own benefit. There are many studies that show the byproducts of the sort of stuff we consume actually has a sort of ambient effect on our own health. But more importantly, because of the social justice issues, because of the welfare issues, and because of the environmental issues. So I can't accept the argument, I'm afraid, that we're too expensive producing things the right way. I know I put 100% of my labor into producing. We don't stop. My son's still outdoors checking on a batch of chicks that came in. He's just checking the temperatures right there, that everything's going well. We've just come out of lambing. We don't sort of clock off. It is a 24-hour job, but you know, alhamdulillah, we've chosen that. But I don't like the implication that somehow it could come down in the future. Yes, in some ways, if networks were open for us, if we maybe got some subsidies, if we were facilitated to us and others to increase production and provide it in a more streamlined way, yes, maybe, you know, that will help price once we start to become the main system of production. But we're not going to cut corners. We didn't go into this to have a profitable business. We went into this to do things the right way. And I don't know how far there is scope for price to come down. I think people have to say, well, okay, how can we tackle that from different directions? Firstly, we've got a lot of money. Most of us, compared to a century ago, we live comfortable lives. Where can we trim some of that? Where should we stop wasting our resources and supporting a global industrial machine? More importantly, though, and more immediately, where can we change our diets? Meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? No, you know, even here on the farm, we produce meat. We try and only eat meat 2 or 3 times a week. You know, vegetarian options, particularly from our own Muslim communities, you know, we have incredible vegetarian options. And also the type of cuts of meat that you're eating. There are cheap cuts. We have a lot of customers who come to us for simple things like lamb bones and various cuts of beef and lamb, which are a lot cheaper. And you can make a real meal out of it and make the meat a centerpiece, but not the dominant feature of any meal. We certainly restrict the amount. One beautiful thing about having moved onto the farm is that we produce so much vegetable and plant produce that we really savor that. And our meals now, you know, this has been for many years now, and we're encouraging our customers to look at food this way. You know, you should be eating sort of 80-90% vegetables with a small amount of meat on the plate, not the other way around. And everything's connected. You look at a lot of our Muslim families, the youth are growing up consuming burgers and meat 24 hours a day, and they don't even have vegetables. Sadly, we have wonderful cafe on the farm on the weekends, and occasionally we get a family. We'll give a spread where it'll have a little bit of our meat, but we do a lot of veg and salads. And from some of the youth, you get that plate back. They've just eaten the meat and they've left all the veg, and you think, oh, really? You know, so I tend to ramble. I'm sorry. Just you could put your hand up and say, be quiet. But I think my point is it's all interconnected, and bringing down the price requires us to change our dietary habits. It requires us to face up to the fact that we need to spend more, and encouraging and supporting that sort of production through farmers markets, etc.
Jazakallah khair, Lutfi. I mean, all of that is gold dust, really. I mean, it sort of follows on. Our last session was with an environmentalist, Fazlan Khalid, who we were talking about emergency on planet Earth. And, you know, it was a lot to do with the holistic sort of change in lifestyle. It's not just about, you know, the chicken shop or, you know, meat. It's about everything, really. You mentioned fibers in clothes, sustainable clothing, sustainable farming, etc., etc. So you know, there's a lot to think about. And you made a great point about just pre-Ramadan, you know, maybe doing an audit on that kind of sort of scale. So there was one question I had in my head, Lutfi, I want to ask before I forget. It was actually sort of passed on to me earlier in the week by dear brother Zaki, Ismail, you may know from Abraham's Organic. We were discussing things around the conversation we might have today. Zaki's a bit shy, so I'm gonna ask for him, but he may come on later. So he touched upon veganism. Actually, I don't know if you wanted to comment on this, but Nighat might have something to say as well. But the deforestation for the production of soya for the vegan industry, and it really hit me. Sort of, well, we're being, you know, attacked from both sides. We've got commercialism from meat, and we're now getting commercialism from the vegan sector. So how can we reconcile that? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, again, Nighat did allude to it earlier. Mixed farming has been a traditional way of managing the land, and that's something I very much support. And you know, we see it around us. We rear the chicken, the lamb on the farm. We get a lot of output from that. Obviously, the poo that's then composted on the farm goes into the veg area. We're producing our veg sustainably. That then produces crop residues that go back to the animals. Animals have a great benefit for grazing on pasture land, which can then on a rotational basis be changed. Or what we often do is we let the sheep onto post-harvest stubble on the land where they can actually graze and fertilize that land. So there are many symbiotic features of having the two together. So actually, I wouldn't separate them. I would say good sustainable farming almost requires a combination of the two. And then the other point I would make is that the idea that you can separate the consumption side of whether it's good to be vegan, bad to be meat eater, again, it's actually the same argument. It's bad to be a commercial factory farmed meat eater, and it's equally bad to eat those vegetables that are produced by pouring chemicals and pesticides. There's a lot of animal welfare suffering in producing vegetables. You don't see it because it's not a lame donkey that the RSPCA can show you, or it's not battery farmed chickens, but it's actually all the amphibians, the fish, the wildlife that are dying in our rivers and our valleys and our fields because of the overuse of pesticides and chemicals. So there's no moral superiority in eating vegetables, unless certainly you'd have to put the word organic prior to that. So if you're eating purely organically raised vegetables, that's great. And I support veganism. As I say, we encourage our customers to eat much less meat. But I do have a little issue with people who don't think deeply enough and actually somehow think that it's better to be vegetarian, but don't address that question of how the vegetables are produced. Importing, you know, stuff from Holland and Spain and much further afield, laced with chemicals, out of season, really, you know, that's a non-starter.
No. So you mentioned the term organic. It was actually my next question. So we see the term organic. I was speaking to a friend. She's from Uruguay, and she came here and she said, "I don't understand the term organic. What else is there?" So, you know, the fact that we have to make a choice between something that's natural and authentic and something that's, you know, artificially produced, you just didn't understand that. So, and when we make that choice to have organic, are we making an authentic choice? Is it organic, and what does organic look like here in the UK?
Yeah, well, I mean, the simple distinction is that organic should be produced without any chemicals, pesticides, and therefore is a more sustainable form of production. So I'm just quickly looking for a picture here. I might show you in a minute, which it reminded me of something. But again, having worked within the organic sector and seen what goes on, nothing's ever perfect. And really, when I mentioned that hadith earlier, Din Mu'amala, that your religion is the way that you socially interact, it's because through social interaction, you can actually have knowledge, connection, and you can actually verify things that you want to know. So we've reached a point where labels don't do it, for me at least. And you have got organic production. I can name a large-scale organic unit near us in Oxford, where they regularly use antibiotics, which is one thing that's forbidden by organic standards, through something called a derogation, whereby the Organic Association can grant you permission to do something you shouldn't do temporarily while you do it. You can buy seeds laced with pesticides from Europe, which you can use in the UK, sorry, with herbicides. So they're pre-laced before you plant them, and therefore, even though you're putting a herbicide in the ground, you're not told off by the Soil Association here in the UK for doing it. So there are loopholes. That's the way we are. So be careful of the loopholes. And another point I would make Islamically, to go back to this issue of what is halal and tayyib, it goes beyond that anyway. We very much like to stress three things about what we try and do. One is to rear our food ethically and sustainably. So that would be what you might put under the category of organic production system, no chemicals and pesticides used on the ground, etc. But that's nothing. If you then have large-sized industrial packing houses and units on the farm that were built unsustainably using unsustainable materials, you've got fleets of tractors, you have all your electrical input coming from non-sustainable fossil fuel sources. You know, so where's the whole sort of the second stage? Where's your energy coming from? Is that sustainable? And we try very much on the farm to use biomass boilers for our own heat. We've planted about 6,000 trees. We're sustainably managing them with an offtake of timber, which is carbon neutral, producing all the heat energy on the farm. We've built our house, this very one we're in right now, out of clay, sand and straw. It's a big mud house, all of it dug from the ground back-breakingly and built by the family. Taken responsibility for the resources we're using, the heat energy that it requires to heat the building, and the sustainability of the resources in it. And the last thing is, as any customer who comes to visit our farm and uses a toilet here, we recycle every piece of poo that any person deposits here on the farm, in addition to recycling and composting all of our own wastes on the farm from crops and reusing the fertilizers. So unless you're auditing, unless the business that's producing food is auditing not only what we traditionally call organic and welfare friendly farming with the animals, but also the energy that they're using to produce it, and the sort of buildings that they live in, and the waste and how they're dealing with that waste, it's a very artificial distinction. You know, you can't hermetically seal off part of what you do. You know, you can't be Mr. Farmer during the day, but Mr. Gas guzzling, Jeep driving, whatever in the afternoon. It's a holistic package, and that's where halal and tayyib goes beyond organic and any certification, because it's a way of life. You know, that's my whole point. It's about a community. It's about us being here to do what we do, so that we can go to the farmers market and meet Ahmed, Zaid and Jane and talk to them about what we do on the farm. They know us, they come and see us, we sell to them, they put their money into us, even though it's more expensive. We create a community. If you go to any farmers market, you'll see that there's a wonderful, vibrant community between the producers and between the producers and our customers, that we're all working together towards a goal. And most of them, like us, they throw open their farms, they say, you know, you come and see, this is what we do, this is how we produce. Yeah.
No, Jazakallah khair. Lutfi, that's inspirational, really. I mean, Nigat touched upon, you know, things that we could do as a community, like eating seasonal, speaking to the butcher about getting different cuts or more organic meat. I mean, is that something you would recommend in terms of something we can actually practically do?
Oh dear, have we gone? Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, Luffy. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I caught it. You dropped out for a while, but yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, practically, there's a lot we can do. Firstly, you know, don't get depressed. If Allah wants the world to go to rack and ruin, it will, and it might well be that, you know, that's Allah's will, that we just, there is that wonderful verse in the Quran that we all know, I'm sure. I think I can paraphrase it, though I don't necessarily know it word for word, but pollution and corruption has spread on the earth and the seas as a result of man's actions, that he may taste the consequences of his actions, and in order that he might return to the right path. You know, we're in that stage now, but the important point in that verse is that it's saying, as a result of man's own actions, you know, yes, we're fulfilling prophecy in a sense, we're fulfilling Allah's plan, but to give us a chance to taste the result of it and maybe return. So ultimately, life is not about saving the world. Life is about saving yourself, the community, those around you, living a good, happy life, enjoying what you do and doing it in a way that you're proud. You know, out of the goodness that you do, you get yaqeen, but you also get a sort of sukoon. You get that tranquility. So ultimately, that's all that we can do, and that's a great thing to do. So I hate anyone to think that this is a depressing position we're in. And life is your social interaction. It is your arguments with your children. It is your hustle and bustle of life. It is your sort of negotiating how to deal with people. It's taking responsibility for what you do. But what can you do on a practical level? So there's so much. I've mentioned farmers markets. I mean, they are a wonderful thing, and I think they're cropping up everywhere, even in big cities. I know, I'm proud to say that Ruby set up the first 2 farmers markets in Oxford, the East Oxford one, which is still the biggest. She was on the original committee that set that up with a number of producers. It's a great place to get involved in green activities, to talk to people who are doing similar things, and get to know local producers. A lot of us have small spaces in our gardens, but a small space can produce a lot. Get out there and grow stuff. Get your children to plant. You know, we've all done the little watercress, presumably at school, that the children grow. Go a bit further than that. You know, kids really love to see things grow, and they're much more prepared to try them and eat them if they've grown them. So, and the social connection that you have with your family, you know, you nurture and develop your relationships rather than leaving everyone just sitting tapping away on their phones all evening, barely communicating. You know, get out there and do something. Turn over half your garden and make an intention to produce at least, you know, some salad crops. Go a bit further, get together with a group of friends, get an allotment. You know, a number of us reaching the age I am, you know, we're getting this sort of middle-age spread. We need to get out there and do something. So, but, you know, by connecting with each other, it's a great way. You know, you share the work, but you'll end up staying half your day on that allotment. You know, make sure you bring your wives, or in fact your wives do it from the start with you, of course. You know, this is a communal thing for the whole family. Eating seasonally is a massive thing. It's really massive. We are ridiculously used to just having off the shelves in Sainsbury's something that is not produced at that time of the year. It requires a big shift. You know, we do get sick of parsnips by about this time of the year, because that's all we've been eating all winter. The root crops are great. You can do many things with them, but you eat seasonally, and you actually appreciate the year, because we look at our dwindling stock of potatoes and parsnips. We've got some of the squashes still left, the butternut squashes and the spaghetti squash we grew last year. They're all going down now, but they've made it through the winter. Onions, garlic, we managed to store and preserve. So definitely that's really important. And there's a lot in the processing and preserving of food that's, again, a very communal act. A lot of the demonstrations we do on the farm are linked to actually how to process soft fruit into jams, how to process vegetables, and store them for the winter. So there's a lot of communal activities around that. But I would say you need to go that one step further, that we need to also be looking at the sort of clothes we're wearing. It's something I'm trying very much now to do. My son Adam has been doing this recently, really very hard, trying to ensure that we're not bringing in any materials that are not sustainable. Visiting charity shops, of course, is a low-cost way of doing it. It's something I've done all my life. We've nearly always gone looking for good recycled materials there. Some of you might know David Warnsby, the musician, who actually played at our Music and Arts Festival about 4 or 5 years ago now. When he did come, he had this pair of leather boots that he insisted he was not going to replace, and he kept stitching them, and I think they were more stitched than leather by the time we'd met him. But you know, you can recycle, you can mend and make do. So I could go on, but there's so many little things. See, these are just little things that you can do in your personal life. So making that audit and then saying, right, well, how can we address this? That's really where we can be very positive and very creative.
So just before we take some questions from the chat or the audience, can you just tell us a little bit about what's happening at the farm? What does your day look like at the moment?
Okay, can I share? How do I do this then? If I share my desktop, is that okay?
Yeah, you can just click the green button, which is the share screen. And then after that, hopefully you should be able to choose what it is that you want to share.
Share desktop or application? Which one is it? The application, won't it?
Yeah, if you've got the application open, you can click on the individual application that you have open.
Oh, okay, good. I might try and do that. That way I can just shamelessly do a little bit of advertising of what we do.
Please, feel free.
I think that's the one. There we are. So if I click on that and share. Okay, there's your little backdrop there. It'll just change. Can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Okay, well, the camping will be open soon, we're hoping. But so what we're doing on the farm, so what was your question, what we're doing on the farm at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, well, we've been, obviously with lockdown, we've been just working away on the farm to get things going for this year. We do still have our farm shop open on the weekends. We're moving in hopefully to a period where it's going to be a bit more busy. We do run courses and workshops. We have the campsite, which is open from the 19th. We do have the Willowbrook Festival, Arts and Music Festival, which I think it's a great experience, really, because I've always had a love and interest in sort of world music and different types of music myself anyway. But more than that, the crafts and the sort of workshops we run really try and create that connection to nature and to get people to express themselves maybe in a way which a lot of our community don't. There's a lot of pent-up frustration, and I think particularly this year there's going to be a lot of that. So we're hoping that if the festival is able to go ahead, this year is going to be a great event. We've actually also got a personal musician who's a great favorite of mine, Richard Thompson, who is a convert to Islam, but has sort of kept a low profile, but has been performing since the late 60s. Wonderful, incredible British folk musician. On the farm, what changes? Not very much. The rhythm, we're generally just working with the animals. We've just come through lambing. We're doing a certain amount of building. We're developing. I can actually put a quick shout out here. We're actually, over the 4 weeks of Ramadan, we're going to try and put up a new small building, which is going to be a meditation prayer area on the farm. So if someone wants to come and do a little bit of work during Ramadan, they're welcome. We're going to probably put out an email asking for volunteers to come down and help us with that. So that's one project I'd like to get finished in the next 4 weeks. Been doing a lot of woodland management at the moment. I've mentioned we planted a lot of trees. That now requires a lot of maintenance. That's about it. As I say, I don't really want to really plug the farm too much, but it's a busy community, and it's a big ecosystem. We don't think of it as a solitary act of rearing a chicken, but more of a, an ecosystem that we're nurturing and developing.
Amazing. When is the festival, Lutfi?
Yeah, the festival is going to be the first week of August if we get the go-ahead. And if you haven't listened to Richard Thompson, forget Cat Stevens. They're from the same era. Richard Thompson's the better musician. So
that's controversial. That could be controversial. But anyway, no, that sounds amazing. And tickets on the website, or?
We're about to announce it. We just got the go-ahead from their management, so we're about to announce it next week, I should think.
Okay, well, let me know if you need a DJ for the festival. But anyway, well, we'll take some questions from the audience now. Khalid, could I pass it over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I mean, I was going to use the wording that Amr normally uses, which is mind-blowing, but I'm going to say that I am flabbergasted. I have to say that I can resonate to so much of what you've been talking about, and I've got so many questions, and Amr will kill me if I start going through all of my questions. But but I'm going to ask before I hand over to the other guys is two things actually. One is that I think you mentioned about subsidizing, and if you had subsidization, that would allow you to do so much more. Is it the halal industry as a whole that is not subsidized, or is it the halal organic industry or the organic industry that's not subsidized in the same way that what Nighat was talking about? And have I confused things there? That's the first part of the question.
The simple distinction is that generally bad farming practices receive subsidy in a sense. Large landowners receive bigger subsidies than small farms, and I think we need a lot more small farms. They're more productive per acre. We produce bigger yields of crops. There are many studies in India that looked at the shift to producing high-yielding varieties, and actually they produce less on larger farms, even though people think it produces more, but per acre it actually produces less. So the subsidy is for big owners of land to just sit on their land and sort of take in the subsidy. That's one side, but the other insidious side of it is the externalities, that is the pollution that these systems cause, the destruction of our waterways, the air quality pollution of large factory farming, and also the factory processings of food. So combined subsidy and externalities, which are not being charged, of inefficient and negative production, whereas people who are trying to do things the right way, whether it's organic or whether it's halal and tayyib, generally the barriers, we face the barriers that they're not paying the full price. Yeah, we're doing all these extra things to preserve the environment, and no one's giving us anything for that. In fact, the opposite. They're not even charging people who are destroying the environment by what they do.
Oh gosh,
yes. We need to level the playing field.
Yeah, that's astonishing. I mean, I think maybe Nighat and yourselves can come up with some kind of a plan to chase after the government to do something, which brings me to my second question. And again, Amir, I'm sorry, I have to ask this: is that our friends who do the kosher meat, are they doing things better or differently? I mean, I know you don't want to mention about HMC and HFA, but they have sort of one legislative body who runs their entire system, and it's very, very I think robust, as I understand it. And are we doing it different? Can we learn anything from them, or are they doing it just as worse and they just got a better reputation?
No, I don't think we can learn much from them. I know there are two producers. I forget the name of the other lady who's got a small farm in Kent, actually. And I shouldn't forget her name because I have met her, but I've forgotten her name. But there's a guy called Neil Payne also, who's a Jewish kosher slaughterman. They're both trying to raise the same issues. In fact, in some respects, they're behind us because they're raising those issues over the last 5-6 years. We've been, as a Muslim community, we've been aware for a bit longer, I think. And they're trying to wake up their Jewish community to the same set of issues in the way their meat's produced. The one saving grace for the Jewish community is that they're quite insular, and they never allowed the kosher industry to spiral outwards to the masses. Halal meat industry has become a mass industry because it's sold to everyone, everywhere. In fact, a lot of meat, we waste our time sometimes checking if there's a halal label on it. A lot of the stuff in the fast food industry, it's all halal.
Oh, I noticed that actually, right. So many of them, I have noticed actually coming from the same places. Yeah, that's quite interesting.
It's very cheap. So they don't have, there's not much we could learn from them, except some of the religious aspects of the way they do the slaughter, but that's a different issue in terms of precision. But no, sadly, the production side, the meat, the quality of the meat, kosher is not actually much better than the mass halal.
Gosh, that's just astonishing and incredibly sad across the board, really. Right, I'm going to try and be quiet before Amir sort of jumps down my throat. But I'm looking forward to coming down with my kids for the camping, to meet the llamas, and do some of all those things that you want going on at the farm anyway. But I'm going to sort of quickly hand over to Wasik, because I think he's had a couple of questions. So Wasik, if you're there, if you'd like to unmute.
Sana Kamlufi, quick question. Have visited your farm many years ago, fantastic place. Kids absolutely loved it, and hopefully we can come back again. Wanted to, I mean, I've not heard or seen many other farms similar to yourself. So I wanted to understand from you, is there demand for this type of farm from within the Muslim community in the UK?
I think it's growing, definitely, and it takes time and commitment, I guess, and it is growing. I do know a couple of farms up north. We know other models. Abraham's doing a lot to actually bring that quality meat from other producers through the halal slaughter process and into the market. And a few people from time to time speak to me. There are some doing small things in their own area that they're producing but selling to friends and family. So yes, it's growing from a zero base 20 years ago to now just being less than 20 people who are doing some sort of venture in this sort of direction. And it will continue to grow, I think. I mean, obviously, the engagement of Muslims with things like the XR movement, with green issues in a broader sense, is obvious. You know, you see that now every day, and that's really quite heartening. We're involved with another group recently that was set up. They actually had their inaugural meeting on the farm called Lion Land in Our Name, which is they loosely call themselves a black land-based collective, but you know, half their membership are Muslim as well. So there are a lot of environmental activists wanting to return back to the land, get access to land. There's a lot of, we were talking about micro production, but things like peri-urban production, horticultural production around the cities. There are a lot of small projects, and even community gardens, within urban community gardens. A lot of those projects producing, if not meat, certainly vegetables, and a lot of Muslims are involved in that. So definitely it's a growing movement. Well, it couldn't have got less, but it's growing from a small base, so it will take time, but it's something we need to push and nurture.
Thank you. I would just a quick comment. It feels like it's growing quite slowly, so I accept. I think, you know, we know about Abraham's, know about yourself, but the growth seems to be slower than what we would need it to be actually able to meet the demand that should be out there for people to live more sustainably. But having said that, I think I need to follow the message that's been said on here, to be able to eat less meat and eat more sustainably and ethically myself as well. Thank you.
And the green movement in the UK, I mean, I'm old enough now to remember the sort of first wave of in the 70s of you know, people getting involved in organizations like Greenpeace, etc. And that's taken a long time. We now have an established organic sector, but it has taken quite a while. I'm quite optimistic. I see change, and as I say, you know, I don't ever believe we should put in front of our mind that we're here to save the world. It's actually the world that needs to be saved from us.
I agree with that, and I think it's like an amazing comment that you've made there. But actually, it is also that, you know, every individual who tries to make that change becomes a collective that does make change, doesn't it, really?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we all individually have to try to sort of strive to be better as Muslims and as environmentalists and as human beings who are living in this world. And again, as Amir mentioned, it was about, you know, the previous conversation we had in the previous Sheikhs race, it was about the environment as well. But it's so profound, actually, that, you know, how distant we've become from this because of this rat race and because of consumerism and capitalism and all those things that I love to talk about, and Amr is going to shut me up, I'm sure.
No, but you're right. Well, that's what I love about what we're able to do on the farm here is to bring people to make those connections, because we're all so separated. You know, we're passive consumers. Everything is thrown at us. We don't understand even the connections, let alone our food, but certainly with, you know, our products, and it's all coming from somewhere. It's all being done somehow, and the waste goes somewhere else. But we're very passive, and we've got to break out of that passive consumerism, because that's an anathema to a Muslim who is meant to be a khalifa. You know, we're khulafa fil ard. Allah made us the representatives on earth. So anything that happens, anything that we do, we're responsible for it. And taking that individual responsibility is what it's all about. It's about creating your own life where you audit what you're doing. You take responsibility for your actions. And when people come to the farm, quite often they're not exposed to that. They've not seen animals, they haven't seen the connections, and it's almost like you can see layers being peeled off them, and their nafs is sort of coming out, and they're actually opening. And it's, you know, alhamdulillah, it's really heartwarming that a lot of people leave saying it's a sort of, what's the right word, like an emotional experience, or a sort of
liberating and invigorating, right? And I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I don't know if this is true, but when I was growing up, you know, when I was young, I was able to go to the farms and actually slaughter during, you know, Eid al-Adha, and there was that connection there, and we used to kind of understand right down to, you know, taking the skin off and so on and so forth. But now it seems that's not allowed. I mean, I've not heard that I can take my kids anywhere. I think even when I was speaking to Zaki a few years ago, he said that, you know, we're not allowed to go into the abattoirs anymore because of health and safety. And I think that disconnect really doesn't. The children don't understand about what they're eating. They just think it's food, as opposed to, you know, the kind of the life cycle or the food chain that they followed.
It's very important people can see it. And even for the farmers, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, there was a lot more on-farm slaughter than there is now. And over the years, the regulations, this is again where the bias comes in, the regulations have made it harder and harder for small abattoirs to stay open, and easier for them to be agglomerated into large, massive units that meet the EU standards, or whichever standards we'll now follow. And that's just, it's been the death knell for small abattoirs. We're still able to operate the poultry abattoir, but, you know, within the regulations there are, and it's difficult. And I think it's really important that a farmer should be connected. Aside from all the other reasons of transportation, welfare, etc., I think the farmers need to be connected to that process.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I think it's something that's close to my heart, as you can probably quite hear that. But we're going to move on to some more questions before we run out of time. So I think actually Galnora had a comment and then a question. So she says our local farmers market was less than transparent with what chemicals they used in production, and those that did answer said the pesticides and chemical fertilizers were commonplace, and that's in rural Kent. And then that leads her to her question, which says, do you use any antibiotics or pesticides on the farm at all, both meat or vegetables?
Yeah, we on the farm we don't. We sell our chicken as free range because we do use a non-organically produced feed for the chicken, and we did that partly as a compromise. I think we were talking earlier about how to make things more affordable. One decision we took early on, we've been organic for about 15 years. I think we took the decision about 6 years ago. And with the poultry, they're fed a free range diet. In terms of the land that they run on, in terms of the medication we use absolutely zero chemicals. No pesticides have been applied to our land for 20 years now. No herbicides are used. We don't use any artificial fertilizer. It's all natural poo fertilizer that's composted and recycled back onto the land. We don't use any antibiotics or any unnatural medication. We rely on things like garlic as an antibiotic. We use a lot of natural remedies, tea tree as antiseptic. We have used antibiotic, I think I can name no more than 3 or 4 occasions when it's a life-threatening issue. We've had 1 or 2 ewes over the years who have had mastitis, which can develop if the milk is not being let down properly. If you cannot milk that out of them, and if you can't treat it by a poultice, which we often put on a sort of garlic mash, then within a week the animal will die. So we've called in a vet and had an antibiotic. As I say, it's a handful of times, 4 or 5 times over 20 years. So no, as a rule, we never use any medication either, except for natural remedies.
That's phenomenal. In fact, I think you know that you're able to have got that many years with it. before I'm going to ask you to
just go back to the point about the farmers markets. If she didn't get the right answer from the producers, it could be that, you know, they're not actually producers. It's one of these markets where they're buying in stuff like the old sort of markets you'd have in the East End, you know, where they're selling anything from everywhere. Make sure it's a real farmer that's actually talking to you. And if you're not satisfied, request that you can go and visit his farm, you know. And as I say, we want people to come and talk to us because exactly those sort of questions are important. You know, we're not Luddites. We're trying to say you've got to reinvent the system completely. We do feel there's a massive change that has to be made. But if there's a life-threatening issue for an animal which we can't solve, then, you know, we would do something, but we'll tell you what we're doing.
That's great advice, actually, and I think that again connects you to that food chain and food life cycle, doesn't it? I think Avais has a question, so I'm actually going to ask him to unmute. Sorry, before I just before I ask you to refer back to some of the previous questions
that came
about. Yeah, no, I'm not going to mute you. Unmuting you there. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Cool. Hey, assalamu alaikum. A quick question, because I've met some South African brothers who are always kind of telling me how their way they do halal in South Africa is like the way to go for a lot of the communities, Muslim communities around the world. What's your experience there? Because I haven't been to South Africa, but I just wanted to kind of understand if there are communities globally, as in Muslim communities, who have actually set up the halal meat industry in a way which actually practices halal tayyib, etc.
Well, again, actually, I can share a picture here which gives you an idea of the. Okay, here we are. If I can take a minute just to load this picture for you. There we go. So if I go back and share my application, there we go. So can you see that? Okay. I have been to South Africa. This is not South Africa. This is the US. I also went to the US for the first time about 9 years ago. I've got a sister that lives in Texas. And I was surprised. You go into supermarkets there and you want to buy meat. You have to look, you have to search for the ones that says grass-fed beef. And that's because it's not normal in America now to feed the sheep on pasture. You can see here, this is what they call cattle lots. And these are intensive units where you've got animals in pens, these outdoor pens, and they're fed the fodder by industrial methods. They'll bring in, you know, large lorries which will bring in the fodder 2 or 3 times a day, and they will defecate in the same spot. It leads to massive slurry pits. There's some better pictures than these, but I couldn't find it just now. But there are massive slurry pits where that waste trickles away to, it poisons the atmosphere, falls as acid rain on local towns, and has caused even skin problems in the local populations. So much wrong with that sort of farming. South Africa is back to the more traditional rangelands. I have visited South Africa and I visited Botswana, where I've seen some of the more extensive grazing systems which they have, and they are more natural. They certainly would be almost organic in a sense that the pasture that they range on is quite organically produced. However, the more commercial you get, the livestock industry relies more and more on fodder fed, often indoor feeding. For some of that time, it relies more and more on chemicals. I don't think South Africa is particularly a leader for organic production. I think what they're referring to is that sense of just really being open plains and having access to the slaughter, which is much less regulated, and it's much more easy for Muslim communities to be slaughtering and eating their own meat. So I can't comment much more on that, but yeah, I think it's just a perception rather than a reality.
No, thank you so much, and thank you so much for answering all of those questions so comprehensively. I have to say it's been a wonderful experience for me, and just to really learn so much, and you know, looking forward to getting my family connected with your farm and just with that food chain in general. And of course, you know, Nick has also given such beautiful and wonderful insights. So I'm going to hand you back over to Amir right now, and then I think there are going to be some closing comments from hopefully from both of you, and then we can go from there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Khalik, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions. It's obviously a hot topic. Nick, if I can invite you back to the conversation. Actually, there was one more question, Lutfi, that I think you mentioned this already, but just to clarify whether you do any stunning at all at Willowbrook.
We do. We actually do use a stun, partly because we couldn't do on-farm slaughter under current regulations without it. But we can guarantee that it's an individual stun which we apply to each animal at a very low level. We've actually checked that they recover fully from that. So we do use a small stun, and it's non-lethal. It's effectively calms the animal by loosening the muscles, similar to what we often get on a weekend when a child touches our electric fencing around the poultry range. In that it's a low level shock that you can get, and your arm will go a bit limp. Now, I don't want to make light of it. We do use it because it's the regulation. We wouldn't have a license for on-farm slaughter unless we applied for a religious exemption, which would be another whole level of hurdles. We find that applied to the temporal lobe at a very low level, it pacifies the animal. It immediately is slaughtered by severing the carotid arteries, which is the UK regulation as well as the Halal requirement. The animal bleeds out fully, and a certain amount of movement still as well, which indicates it's clearly alive for the 90 seconds during the bleed out. So yes, that's the current system we use.
So, Nighat, any closing comments from you? I think we're sort of getting to that point where we're wrapping up. So any sort of closing comments?
I think I do, and I love what Lutfi is doing. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but we visited your farm when you were living in a caravan, and it's really moved on since then. I have to, it's due. I have to go back and visit. I mean, with COVID and everything, I'm not sure how things are, but maybe I should join, the festival when you have it. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Definitely come and visit us.
Very inspirational. One thing I wanted to say is that I think as I mean, and I'm glad you referred to in the Quran. In the Quran, we talk about cattle all the time, and I know I'm going back to cattle because this was beef, and I'm just trying to stick to the same topic. But I think if you read Surah Nahl, and it's just the first few verses, the fifth one I think, where it talks about cattle and grazing, and that you see beauty in them when you take them out in the morning, and beauty when you bring them back.
Sorry, can you just tilt your camera down a tiny bit? You're sort of, just a little.
Where am I? What about now? Is that better?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay. So I think that whole concept of actually really looking at things in terms of beauty, and I think Lutfi very aptly explained it in such a beautiful manner. I think it's really important. I just wanted to say one thing. We're no longer just small communities and doing our own little thing. I think what we do has an impact globally as well. So for instance, I was trying to do a project in Pakistan where we're trying to regenerate some of the land in some of the semi-arid areas. And one of the things when I speak to people over there, they come back to me saying, oh, but you're telling us to produce less. But, in the UK, they produce 25 litres of milk a day and so on and so forth. And what they don't understand is the impact, that has on the animal, the environment, the people, everything. And they are blindly trying to copy something. It is almost like an argument, you really, I think what we do and how we do things, we have a responsibility because there are people who will follow us and they think that this is the better way of doing things. So I think we need to be more, I suppose, how we choose, but also what we do is really important. I just wanted to show you why. I mean, can I just share my screen, because I went to Zimbabwe and I want to show you what, if we look at our land very holistically and we manage our land holistically, what differences it can make in, say, the subtropics, because it was just phenomenal. I mean, I met somebody called Alan Savory here in UK, and I said to him, you need to come to Pakistan. And he said, oh, this is what I do. When I went there, I half believed him because I didn't come from an agricultural background, but what I saw had changed over there was phenomenal. If I can share with you, can you see my screen?
Not yet, but give it a go.
Yeah, very quickly. Is that it? Can you see?
Nope, not yet.
Not quite yet.
Share screen. What do I do? One participant can...
it's the green button in the center, share screen.
Oh, I have to press that one, yeah.
Yeah, and then you can choose the app, yeah.
So this is, where I went. This is a ranch called Dibagombe Ranch, and it's in Zimbabwe. And this is how the land was. It is almost, desert, literally. And they started, bringing in holistic land management practices. So you see this here in 2005, 2006, 2007. They've deliberately taken pictures in the dry season from this is the same tree. And you can see here, this is in the dry season. And they had a drought as well. They had a rainfall failure in this year. But despite that, what you're having here is a very healthy ecosystem. And they appear brown, but it's good enough for the animals. They have an amazing, digestive system. They can absorb it. But when you have something like this, you actually end up with, the rainfall actually goes into your subsoil and the aquifers. And if I show you this next picture, this is a riverbed. And, there'd be rain, and I saw some watermarks which are 9 meters high. But within 3-4 weeks, there would be no water. And this is a riverbed which gets so dry. But when they started doing these practices, this is how it changed too. So what we're talking about is it's so big, that we can, really make differences. And I do feel we have a responsibility as people living in the UK in areas who, we are much more prosperous than people. We it's so hard when I meet the communities in small villages in, say, Pakistan. I find it really hard. They are so what should I say? Information is thrown at them, and we need to just showcase how this system is better. So Lutfi, I'd be very happy to talk to you at some time how we can, try and create those sort of, simple metrics or something where we can actually showcase what it means and how it changes.
I was going to say that. I mean, can people get involved? I mean, can the community help in this in any way? I mean, how is it that it can be socialized in the wider world, so to speak?
Yeah, I think we need to start the conversation, because I think we tend to stay out of all these mainstream conversations. We really need to be part of it, in this country and elsewhere as well. And, I'm sure we can, I'd be happy to explore, and maybe we can start some sort of conversation. I'm planning to do a project in Pakistan. I've been speaking to people. But I think what will be really interesting is how do you start with communities? How do you change? How do you work with private landowners? And actually, it's a mindset change, as you mentioned, Leslie. It really is what you think and how you want to go forward. There are many people there who want to change, but they don't know how to. So it will be really, really useful to understand how to do that.
Thank you very much, Nighat. Yeah, do you want to unshare now?
I'm trying to. I'm so bad with this.
No, don't worry.
Sorry, my computer has just too many screens. I'm back to you.
No one worse than me at the tech side of things.
And I'm okay. No, you've done it. My husband is the tech person. I'm not. I'm just the. Okay, have I got it?
Yeah, you've done it perfectly. You've done it perfectly. I was going to say before you do, I'm going to continue. There was a comment that you mentioned about some training that's available in the chat. You might want to just repeat what you said in the chat.
These people, and I used to think that they were very left-wing. It's the Land Workers Alliance. So they do some amazing work with new entrants to farming. If anybody's interested, you can also look them up. They train. They access to land, as Lucy mentioned, is a huge issue. Tenancy, access to land. They're real issues, but how to get to grips with it? They could it could be a good starting point, their website, and then maybe connecting with them. And then of course, if you want to bring in the more Islamic perspective, I think no better person than the three as we have here. And I think I noticed Zeki is there as well. But yeah,
great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nighat. So just going to pass over to Lutfi for some closing comments, and then we'll pass back to Khalik for the closing dua, and we'll close the session. Lutfi?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, on the slide we just saw from Nighat there, it shows you one thing that I'm very much aware of: that the resilience of the land, that the land can bounce back in ways we can't really understand. We don't understand the damage we're doing, but we also don't understand the mechanisms that are there for rebalance. So we should always be optimistic, and really just to refocus on the small steps. Individually, it's through our own small steps that we can make changes. So think about what we eat, what we live in, what waste we produce. And maybe just a slightly radical message to end it with. get out there and agitate and do things, get involved, be on XR demonstrations, or if not, at least go to local groups where you can get involved in discussions, try and change things. It's through participation that we really act. You know, Islam is not a monastic faith where we encourage isolation. We actually encourage to be a good Muslim in the midst of all the hustle and bustle. So be active.
Disruption. I think that's a buzzword, isn't it? Be a disruptor. Okay. Actually, Lutfi, before we really close up, there was one more question from Gulnora. What is the requirement to get religious exemption for an abattoir?
I would have to look at it, but it is a lot more complicated than the current legislation that allows on-farm slaughter. On-farm slaughter is a right, whereas currently it's a right for poultry within a certain number of home-produced animals. Religious exemption is a much more convoluted system, and I can check onto it. I can check into that, and maybe if she wants to email me, I'll have a look and let her know.
Sure. Okay. So Gulnara, if you could perhaps get in touch with Lutfi directly, or pop along to Willowbrook. I think that's a wrap, guys. So Jazakallah khair for everyone who attended. Many thanks to Dr. Lutfi, to Dr. Nighat. It's been a fascinating session, very informative, learnt a lot, but certainly looks like there's a lot of reflection to do, and Ramadan the perfect month to do it. So Jazakallah khair again. If I can pass over to Brother Khalik for the closing dua, and we'll close the session.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, it was an amazing session. Yeah, I'm just going to close it. I try to make it as short as possible. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adhaban nar. Oh Allah, we seek refuge in you. We ask you to guide us on the righteous path. We seek your forgiveness. Oh Allah, we ask you to bless our guests for giving up their valuable time to provide us with knowledge through their work and their experiences. Oh Allah, we ask you to put barakah in the work that Sister Nighat is conducting, and grant her success in her startup company and provide her the opportunity to succeed in the great and noble task she is embarked upon. Oh Allah, we ask you to also put barakah in the exceptional work that Brother Dr. Lutfi and his family are doing at Willowbrook Farm. Give them the strength and courage to continue to provide halal sustenance to the Muslim community and all the additional wonderful work that you guys are doing, mashallah, and continue to carry that out. Ameen. Oh Allah, we ask you to bless our community. They have taken out their valuable time to listen to this show and listen to the wonderful speakers and join in this gathering. Oh Allah, you command us in Surah An-Nahl, the Surah 16, Ayat 114, to only eat food that are considered lawful or halal. Please give us the ability to understand its importance as you command, and how important it is for us as our well-being and for our family's well-being. Ameen. Oh Allah, please forgive any shortcomings from us during this session and accept our efforts. Please accept the efforts from the Al-Emaan Center, its trustees and its management. Oh Allah, please continue to unite the community. With only a few days to go until Ramadan, we ask you to give us the opportunity to gain the blessings of the entire month of Ramadan. We ask you to forgive us and grant us the highest rank. We ask you to forgive us and forgive all those who have passed away that were with us during the previous month of Ramadan, and grant them the highest ranks in Jannatul Firdaus, and give us the opportunity to gain all the blessings for the full month, inshallah. Oh Allah, we ask you to help us to fast not only through our stomachs but also through our actions. Oh Allah, please allow us to gain as much blessings and as much out of the month of Ramadan as possible. I mean, you know, I was just going to sort of finish with Allahumma inni Afun Tuhibbul Afwa Fani, which is something that we should all be reading during the month of Ramadan. You know, please remember all of us in your prayers during the month of Ramadan, and please remember us just generally. It's a chance to give sadaqah jariyah just through du'as, you know, by praying for us and praying for the entire community, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Rahmati ya
And that is why Brother Khalik does the dua. So once again, Jazakallah khair, everyone, and the final word is Ramadan Mubarak. May you all have a blessed Ramadan. May Allah accept it from us all. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.